Godforsaken is just really, really good. So instead of me doing a review, just enjoy some random footage of Gimli beating the shit out of some orcs. Hi there fellow roleplayers and game masters, my name is Mr. Tarask and this is your go-to YouTube channel for everything Cypher System, and today I want to talk about Godforsaken, which is a book that allows you to play fantasy games in the Cypher System. Now, don't get me wrong, you can play fantasy game with the Cypher System rulebook alone. The thing right there that I reviewed on this channel right here. They even talk about fantasy, and the Cypher System is built to play any genre. Science fiction, science fantasy, modern day London with witches, zombie apocalypses or apocalypse or stuff like that. Anything you want. But Godforsaken goes deeper into the fantasy genre and how to use the Cypher System to play fantasy games like Dungeons & Dragons, like Pathfinder, or other fantasy games we know and love. And I want to start off by saying that Monte Cook does a really good job of translating the Cypher System for fantasy, because when I was reading the Cypher System rulebook, although they go into fantasy there, I was left with a ton of questions. And Godforsaken explains it to me in a very easy to understand way, and that is Monte Cook's strength, basically. So what I want to do with this video is kind of go over what you get from this book and shortly give my short opinion on everything you get from the book, and then I want to dive into the PDF and kind of give you some ideas and point you towards some things that I think are really cool. Now, if you decide to pick up this book for yourself, make sure to use one of the affiliate links in the description below. Yes, they are affiliate links. If you decide to buy anything, I get a little bit of cash and it makes the channel go on and I can continue what I'm doing. The first thing I want to talk about is the cover. This is one of those books that you put on your shelf, on top of your shelf, or somewhere for people and yourself to see. This is just a piece of art. This is a painting. This is, wow, I just think this speaks. I picked up this book purely for the cover. I saw the cover on the interwebs and I was like, I need that, right? So, it is a dragon. It feels like really good, high quality. It is a dragon, but inside the dragon, you can also see like a castle, dark castle going on. And then you can see like this person on a cliff with a sword, kind of like Luke Skywalker in that first Star Wars poster, that really old Star Wars poster, holding up the lightsaber. And it just screams fantasy. This cover just screams high fantasy, and I absolutely adore it. Now let's see what you get, what they say in the back you get from this book. And I will kind of give like my opinion on stuff you get from the book later in the video, but also now anyway. So you get rules for treasure, traps, magic, and other topics particular to fantasy gaming. Indeed you do. New playable species, along with new foci and guidelines for adapting existing foci to fantasy use. And advice for building common fantasy character types in the Cypher System. Now, this is true. This is what you get. You get new playable species along with new foci and guidelines to adapt your existing foci to fantasy. So, foci from the Cypher System are usable. You can use those within Godforsaken, or you can like reflavor them, because the Cypher System, we have to say, the Cypher System is all about reflavoring it to your game. So, you can perfectly use a focus, that sounds really sci-fi, but just by changing like the idea of it, you can kind of like reflavor it into becoming, suddenly it's a fantasy spell. A power that suddenly becomes a fantasy spell, but in sci-fi it comes from a device, but in fantasy it just comes from the tip of your hands or something like that. So they do that really well. And there's also the same thing goes for species. They go into this. I will go into this later, but they have species in here. But the cool thing is, species in Cypher are a broad term. It is more important to just like your description of your character is the most important thing. Your character's sentence and your flavor and everything is the most important thing in the Cypher System. So you can play a dwarf just by saying, I'm a dwarf, right? But you can take whatever focus, you can take whatever descriptor, you can take whatever you want, and then just say, this is what I look like, I'm a dwarf. But what they do with the species here is they kind of just give you just a stereotypical idea of like, hey, if you want to play a dwarf or an elf or whatever the races are in here, you can use this descriptor, you get this focus, and if you are a human, you get this, and if you are this race, you get this, but you're completely free to change that around as much as you want. It's just for like people who are looking, because there are so many descriptors, there's so many foci, there's so much stuff going on that finding the right one is just sometimes hard. So just going into like the elf and saying, okay, I'm just playing the elf from the book is really easy for players and makes just the character building easier and better. So that's kind of how they look at species, as opposed to like 5th edition or whatever. You pick your species for getting extra dexterity because you want to play a rogue. So you need to play a halfling or you need to play an elf, right? Which is not always true, I know. Discussion of the many varieties and subgenres of fantasy along with the resources of inspiration. Yes, so it's more of like a dungeon master guide thing going on where they talk about like there's high fantasy, there's low fantasy, there's boots on the ground fantasy, there's more like zoomed out fantasy, like the what is it called? Fire and Ice. What is it called? I forgot, like the Song of Fire and Ice, but what is it called on television? I just completely forgot what's called on television. So different kinds of, this kind of stuff that you read on an airplane or on the toilet or in bed before you go to sleep. It's more like advice and stuff, which is really great to have. A complete Godforsaken setting. Characters seek glory and wealth and they venture into the Godforsaken lands. It even has a setting. Now, I didn't buy this for the setting. Going to be completely honest, I didn't buy it for the setting. I read some of the stuff of the setting. Some people say it's really good, and it probably is, but I personally didn't buy it for the setting. 2 full-length adventures for use in the Godforsaken setting. Now, they say they are for use in this Godforsaken setting or your own campaign. Plus 3 Cypher shorts. So what you get is species, magic items, trap rules, new foci for playing the right character. You get a freaking campaign setting. You get adventures, all within this beautiful, beautiful book. Oh, I completely forgot. There's also dozens of fantasy creatures and NPCs in here, like liches and basilisk and manicore, elementals, wyvern, and more. Yes, it is also a bestiary. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the PDF of Godforsaken, written by Monte Cook and Sean K. Reynolds. And the cover is still amazing, and it is empty. Just kidding, of course. So, Godforsaken, I just want to, like, kind of go through the PDF and show you what they're trying to do. This is not a review where I talk about everything that is in the book. It's more a review of to give you an idea if you want to pick it up for yourself. So, here is the table of contents that has a 3 parts, basically, which is the fantasy world building, the Godforsaken setting, which is the setting itself, and the adventures. So, the most important part for me personally as a user of this book is part 1, fantasy world building, because they have a lot of interesting stuff here, but most importantly for me, it is the fantasy character options. Now, they also go into building your fantasy setting and fantasy plots, which is a really great read if you are looking for like that kind of Dungeon Master's Guide-esque tips and tricks and stuff that like these people who wrote this kind of want to teach you how to build your own fantasy setting, how to make it interesting, how to come up with good plots for your characters, for the characters to actually be where they are, to make it make sense. But I want to kind of go to the fantasy character options right here. Because right here, we can see it's very common for players who like fantasy role-playing games to have a particular kind of character in mind, blah, 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 blah. So what they try to do here is kind of give you an idea of how of the different ways of how you can build certain typical, stereotypical characters from fantasy we've known, like from Lord of the Rings, from Dungeons and Dragons, from Pathfinder, from World of Warcraft, from all that fantasy stuff, that typical stuff. They kind of teach you how to use Cypher for that, because Cypher approaches it differently. So they go into the alchemist, the cleric, the bard, the barbarian. They even go into the druid, the gunslinger, inquisitor, fighter, merchants, monks, rangers, rogues, sorcerer, and just to give you an idea, so as you might know, if you build a character for the Cypher system, you always have a character sentence. So a character sentence is basically, let's say your character's name is Johnny McDoodle, and Johnny McDoodle, your character sentence always goes, Johnny McDoodle is a blank blank who blanks. So you fill in your type, descriptor, and focus, so you become, you have this character sentence that kind of describes you. And if you want to, for example, play a barbarian, let's look at the barbarian right here. A barbarian character is probably a warrior, or to focus a little more on skills in combat, an explorer. So let's say he's a warrior, right? Good foci to choose from are lives in the wilderness, masters weaponry, needs no weapon, which is really cool for a barbarian. You can build a barbarian that just uses their fists to punch people. Never says die, because the Goonies are awesome, and gives that survivability, right? So performs feats of strength, and another focus literally says rages, which could be your focus. Rages, that could be your thing. Now you are a warrior. Now Johnny McDoodle is a warrior. Let's say you take the focus, let's say never says die, right? So now Johnny McDoodle is a blank warrior who never says die. Or a blank warrior who performs feats of strength. Or a blank explorer who never says die. So there's all these different kinds of way of building it, and you need to fill in that first blank also, which is different, but it's all of these blanks kind of give you powers, and all that combined makes up your character. And I want to jump in really quickly with something else, something that these books, these Monte Cook books do really, really well, is if they talk about something that is not in this book or is in the book, and you don't really know what they mean by it, they tell you right here that, for example, flavor is on page 34 of the Cypher System handbook. So that is really, really handy to have. They have that everywhere. The wizard, for example. So they make that distinction between prepared spellcasting and spontaneous spellcasting. They even have a full thing right here, and in the column at the side they also have, like, when they talk about a focus or a power or anything that is not in this book, they just give you the page of the book that it is in. So it is in the Cypher System basic rule book, which is that thing behind me right there. So if you have that one and you have this one, you can combine that and build all this stuff. So here they, for example, say wizards are usually adepts, but a person-oriented wizard might be a speaker. You can build it whatever you want, and if you want to go, so you can have like things like master's spells, or so then you are Johnny McDoodle is a blank adept who masters spells. That is his character sentence. But you can also go into, like, for example, if you want to be a diviner mage, which is my favorite kind of mage, you could take a focus that's called learns quickly, sees beyond, separates mind from body, or solves mysteries. These are all different things that do different things, but they really, really build your character the way you want. But all of these are suggestions, and that is the way the Cypher system is built, and it's really interesting. You can take the stuff you want from this and change other stuff around as much as you want to really build the character you are trying to build. So all of the new foci they talk about in this section are, of course, all explained here. For example, takes animal shape, which is basically gives you powers for every tier. Your tier in Cypher System is your level. So at level 1 you get animal shape, at level 2 you get communication with animals, tier 2 you also get soothe the savage, and all of that, all of those powers. There is uses wild magic, wields an enchanted weapon. So yeah, all of that stuff is in here, and then they have a whole section on making foci fantastic. So they take a few foci from the Cypher System rulebook, again, the book right here behind me, and they kind of talk about how you can change stuff around to make it so that it works for fantasy. So for example, builds robots. In the Cypher System rulebook, there is a focus that's called builds robots. Of course, not for all fantasy settings that would make sense, but they say you create golems or other animate things out of inanimate materials. And then there is the whole text that explains how and why and how you do that. So again, here are the things if they talk about, they even put some stuff in like the word interface here in red letters, just so you know that they're going to say here what page that is. That's usability, and I absolutely love that. Now, of course, all of the powers and extra abilities you get from the new foci in this book are, of course, also written out and explained in this book. And some of the new foci give you abilities that are in the Cypher System rulebook. The page numbers will always be there because that is the usability that Monte Cook goes for, which is really great. Something that I want to talk about now is, of course, they also talk about like the fantasy rules modules are about like equipment and traps and all that stuff. There's different weapons and how to use them in the Cypher System. There's all kinds of different equipment, from armor to weapons to even vehicles. Everything, it's all in there. There's an entire section on that. But something that really interests me personally is the fantasy species. They already have a few fantasy species in the Cypher System rulebook. Just to be correct, the ones that are in here already are the dwarf, the elf, the half-giant, and the hellborn. So those are the options that are already in the Cypher System rulebook. So the dwarf and the elf are already in there. And they kind of add catfolk, and they add dragon folk, they add the gnome, lizard folk, halfling, and that's it. So there's a few races that they add. And they talk about how you can build these. Again, these are more ways to give you an idea of how to build a certain let's say you want a species, so you want to play a catfolk, right? So they kind of tell you, so you have the following characteristics. You are agile, +4 to your speed pool, you have trained in climbing, bared claws, even unarmed, your claws are a light weapon, inflict 4 points of damage. Damage is static in the Cypher System. And then they kind of give a link to the starting adventure. Now there is a slight issue. Variant rule, 2 descriptions. By having dwarf, elf, or other species take the place of a character's descriptor, it creates a situation where only human characters have the variety of choosing a descriptor that suits their personality. So all of this stuff that you get replaces your descriptor. So your descriptor, for example, now becomes catfolk. So let's say Johnny McDoodle was a blank warrior who never says die. Now Johnny McDoodle is a catfolk warrior who never says die. Now that becomes a problem when you have humans and fantasy races among each other, because humans can pick whatever they want, right? So it kind of takes away of the versatility. Now there's 2 things you need to remember. It's not because it says this that you need to take that when playing a catfolk. You can just build whatever character you want and say you are a catfolk, which makes you a catfolk, right? So the only difference is that if you want to really use these for a race, if your game master says, like, if you want to play a catfolk, this is what you get for your descriptor. A variant rule is just giving people 2 descriptors. So humans can take 2 for their choice. They will become slightly more powerful, of course, but people who play fantasy race also get 2. They get 1 from their fantasy race, and they get 1 to choose freely from the Godforsaken book or from the Cypher System rulebook. And that is, to my opinion, still what makes the Cypher System great. So you have that versatility of just making whatever character you want with your type, your descriptor, and your focus, and even if you want a flavor, and you can just say that you are a gnome by just saying that you are a gnome, right? But, well, if your GM kind of like allows that. But otherwise, if you want to play more of a stereotypical gnome, you become a gnome as the first blank in your character sentence, which gives you genius. So you're +2 to an intellect pool. You are trained in 2 skills that suit your creative nature, such as alchemy, smithing, poetry, cooking, wood carving, and pottery. Now, really important, they say such as alchemy, smithing, poetry, poetry, right? Cooking, wood carving, or pottery. And by that, they mean that whatever makes sense in the setting you are playing and for the character that you are playing. Work with your game master to figure out what skill, because in the Cypher system, you don't have a particular set of skills. You actually have a set of skills that you can write down yourself. There is a list of skills, but there's also, they also say, if there are other skills that make sense within your world, just write that down and work with your game master whenever the system says you gain a new skill that makes sense in this and this and this, you can get one. So for example, I don't know, maybe knitting. Maybe your character is an old lady who likes to knit, right? So yeah, knitting could be, again, this is here, and I love it. So yeah, all of these are in here. These races are in here, and together with the Cypher System rulebook races, you have a really good amount of races you can play in any fantasy setting. A cool thing that Monte Cook does with a lot of their books is Cypher Shorts, and these are literally about 2 pages long, kind of mini adventures, encounters type things that you can run for your players in between a session, during a session, in your campaign world, as an introduction to the Cypher system, as just a fun in-betweener when there is a character, like a player that can't show up and the other characters need to have something to do. You can run a tavern brawl, for example. There's a tavern brawl in here, and they are all just really to the point, like this is how you run them, this is how it goes, and they all have like a character creation, that like they have the setup of it, the encounters, the possible different encounters. They have a conclusion. GM intrusions, of course, are also in there. There could be a fire in the bar. There could be an injured patron in the bar or a bully in the bar. All of that stuff. And whatever you need to run that, they say right here where you can find that. There's 3 of them in this book. One is the Tavern Brawl. The other one is the thing on the what? On the... Okay, and then there is the Lost in the Dungeon one, which I like the most. I've read through this one entirely. I really like. And then there are the creatures and NPCs, and I just wanted to like quickly scroll through this, just show you a few about like creatures and NPCs. Like this one, the Basilisk, for example, is really cool, and it shows off again how simple a stat block for a creature in the Cypher system is, and how easy it is to run for a game master. So all you basically need... All you need to run a monster is the level, so which is level 5, which means you need a 15 to hit it. You need its health, how many points people need to deal damage to defeat it, and how much damage it inflicts per hit. That's it. That's all you need. All of the other stuff is extra stuff the monster can, extra stuff that the monster can do. And this monster, of course, it is a basilisk. It can do all kinds of crazy stuff. For example, here it says perception and stealth as level 6. What that means is really simple. If this monster has to spot a character, the character, of course, rolls some kind of stealth check, some kind of... The character rolls with their d20, like the player rolls with their d20, but again, instead of rolling against a level 5 creature, because it is about perception, because it is about the creature spotting them, it becomes a level 6 difficulty, which is an 18 to hit on their d20 in order to succeed. So, and if this thing hides and the players are trying to spot it, it's the same thing. It is about stealth, so it becomes a level 5 for like just like one roll. 6. It becomes a level 6 for just like one roll. That is how it basically works. And then they have extra powers that is just written down in these little text boxes. There's one thing I wish they do. Monte Cook is really good with usability, but please use more bold letters in these walls of texts so I can spot it quicker, because I'm dyslexic and it's really hard for me to keep focus on this much text, but that's just a detail. For me personally, look at this art. These are all the stat blocks, and there are like really typical stuff in here. There's already a bunch of monsters in the Cypher System rulebook. There's even a bunch of monsters in the Numenera book in the 9th World Bestiary, although that's more science fantasy. A lot of the creatures can be used in whatever fantasy game you want. So with the Cypher System rulebook and this book, and maybe whatever other book you have so many creatures you can use air elemental, thorn elemental, water elemental, so many creatures you can use against your players or with your players, and creating your own creatures for the Cypher system. I will do videos about that, by the way. It's really, really easy. It is barely an inconvenience. And that is basically it. Well, no, it is. Actually, there's a lot more to cover in Godforsaken. It is a big book. It has a lot of content. But for now, I have been using it more as a tool set to create fantasy for my Cypher System game that I'm planning to play with whoever wants to play with me. So, for me, it's more of a tool set, but it has an entire... I mean, there is magic items in here. There are 3 full-length adventures in here on top of the Cypher shorts, or I don't know how many adventures, 2 full-length adventures in here on top of the Cypher shorts. There is rules about equipment. There's an entire, did I say there's an entire Godforsaken campaign setting in here with like with like cities and villages and plot hooks and people who live in the Godforsaken setting and all that stuff. It's all in here, and there's so much more ground to cover, but for now, you'll either have to do with this video or pick it up for yourself. Link in the description below. Until next video, bye-bye.